Welcome to the fifth session of the Carbon Table.
Hi everyone, good evening and welcome. Thank you so much for joining for another session of the Carbon Table. Today's session is Decarbonizing Automotive, Building Resilient Supply Chains for the Future. Before we begin, we would like to start with the Mission Life video. Post the video, Siddharth from Fitsol will take over and lead the session forward.
We are just a tiny speck in this vast universe. But are we sure the truth is only what meets the eye? Think again. This is our doing. We have plagued and poisoned Mother Earth with our selfish motives. India, known for large-scale behavioral change programs, has once again recognized the urgency and has led the global alliance with Mission Life.
मिशन लाइफ क्लाइमेट चेंज के खिलाफ लड़ाई का लोकतांत्रिक डेमोक्रेटिक एक प्रकार से उसका विस्तार कर रहा है, जिससे हर कोई अपने सामर्थ्य के हिसाब से योगदान दे सकता है। मिशन लाइफ इस बात पर भरोसा करता है कि छोटे छोटे प्रयासों का भी व्यापक प्रभाव हो सकता है। मिशन लाइफ हमें प्रेरित करता है कि हम सब अपनी रोजमर्रा की जिंदगी में ऐसा बहुत कुछ कर सकते हैं जिससे पर्यावरण की सुरक्षा हो।
Revolutionizing general outlook, our Prime Minister envisions to change individual and community behavior to bring in significant impact on the environmental and climate crisis. Life's objective to take individual and collective action for protecting and conserving the environment. Looking to bring in paradigm shift, Mission Life envisions three core transformations: change in demand, change in supply, and change in policy. Simplistically put, Lifestyle for Environment is a mission to help you identify simple acts in our daily lives that can contribute significantly to climate change. The ideology is designed keeping in mind that the actions would be specific and measurable, easy to practice by individuals, communities, and institutions, and non-disruptive to ongoing economic activity, and in fact, promoting economic activity on the foreseeable future. So, let's take a pledge today and show to the world that we are environmental conscious and can lead the path for the world to follow. Lifestyle for Environment.
Okay, I think we can start. Primarily, thanks a lot everyone for joining. I think it's great to have a lot of you folks in here. So before I get started, I thought I'll give a small amount of introduction of different folks who will be, along with me. I'm Siddharth. For those of you who do not know, I'm part of the strategy team at Fitsol, which is automotive-focused decarbonization as a supply chain company that works on helping companies track, measure, and report emissions. And the second part of it is also help reduce emissions, right? And along with me, I have a couple of very, very interesting, speakers for this carbon table session. One is VK Sharma, sir. Sir, if you're there, you can spotlight or somebody, it would be great. The second person is Tarun Jha. To give you guys an introduction to both of them, I think VK sir, I mean, his entire experience can be a separate carbon table session in itself, right? Across being with Maruti Suzuki for what, close to a couple of decades. After that, with ACMA's cluster programs, heading their L&D vision, right? You name it, the certifications and real life execution across major automotive suppliers, right from certifications to GRI to CBAM to executing decarbonization within automotive players. Sarah's been powering the industry, pushing the industry, and working with startups such as us. While on the one hand, I have somebody like him, on the other, I have somebody who's very young, Tarun Jha with us from Helionis Labs. For those of you who do not know, Tarun is the co-founder of the company, and they essentially work, and he's one of very few people who are working on deep tech and material sciences within this decarbonization sector, which is the need of the hour in terms of where innovation has to go, right? So thought I'll give a quick 30-second introduction for both of them. I'll also let them each introduce when they start their own communication within this carbon table, right? Before that, thought I'll just set context on why automotive is a key sector within as far as decarbonization is concerned and what is actually moving in the sector, right? I mean, India is moving towards a manufacturing focused economy. And we have different subsectors within manufacturing. We have textile, we have automotive, you have heavy industries, power, etc. Right? Uh, Along all of these, one of the most key sectors is automotive. And across, in India and globally, I think there's a massive movement as far as decarbonizing the entire value chain is concerned, right? Be it different casting and forging players within the sector, be it sheet metal players. A large part of this is driven by two main, levers. One, of course, is the customer pressure, right? All the major OEMs, nationally and internationally, are starting to put pressure across their value chain, fundamentally, and they're looking at it in a very strategic lever. One way how we put it up is carbon is turning into a sourcing KPI, right? On the second aspect of it is, I think if you're going to be part of the Nifty, if you're listed, and if you're going to be part of top 250, then slowly what the BRSR is now starting to mandate is, value chain ESG data, which means from your top suppliers, you need to start collecting data. I mean, there are certain nuances in terms of how the supplier is selected, which we will not go deeper into this. But it's a combination of regulatory driven push along with a customer pressure that is actually pushing this sector, right? And a large part of OEM's requirement is digitization, which is one part of it, so that there is structure created. But I think India has gone beyond the phase where sustainability just becomes a tick in the box, is how we call it, right? It is moving into an era of you do not only tell me as a tick in the box, but you start giving me what are the initiatives that you're going to do for reducing your emissions, improving your social and governance aspect of it, but also start executing it. And a lot of value chain players, or tier one or tier two automotive players who we are working with, we see there is a dearth of knowledge in terms of what needs to be done from the regulatory aspect and also from the aspect of executing certain things which would help them reduce their emissions cost, improve their ESG score, thereby positioning them strategically with each of their OEMs, right? And this kind of gives me a beautiful segue into the most final part of it, which is also the title of the entire carbon table, which is a resilient supply chain, right? What ESG as a framework, it's a kind of a risk framework as well, if you look at it from a historical perspective. And a lot now, what is being, especially after the recent geopolitical events, a large part of this, large part of, major big companies are looking at supply chain resilience. They wish to understand it. They wish to see what is the risk, especially from the procurement teams, right? So a combination of regulatory drivers, push, along with, you're starting to see an ROI on decarbonization initiatives across the board, right? And I mean, I have VK Sharma and Tarun, who will be speaking more on that aspect. Let me not steal their thunder. But I thought I'll set up a context in terms of how this is kind of being panning out. Now that I've given my entire sermon, I thought I'll open the floor to VK sir and Tarun. Right, I'll start with VK sir. Sir, I think would love to understand, right? Because I think you've seen the entire evolution of the automotive sector, if I'm not wrong. So if you can, touch base with where India is, where India was, where India is, and how are you seeing those challenges and those kind of aspects in the sector? So,
Thank you, Siddharth. Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, I've been in the industry for 42 years now. 15 years I spent with ACMA, and earlier to that, 27 years I was with Maruti Suzuki India Limited, and we have actually seen the Indian industry grow, specifically the auto component industry. In the 1980s and early 90s, it was very, very sort of primitive. There were not even floors inside the factories, and our industry has really grown, and today I'm proud to see that our component manufacturers, they are competing at the global levels and they are winning global contracts. Today, we have come a long way as an auto component industry. But of course, now, specific to today's topic, for example, environment, social governance, and all this sustainability. Sustainability is a fairly recent concept for all of us. I think all of us, we just heard about it. During the times of COVID, I remember doing a lot of research online while I was sitting at home during COVID. In 2021, we had introduced one of the first programs. But generally, the tone of the industry and even the customers, it has changed a lot over a period of time. Earlier, you bought products just because a good name was associated, quality was good. I remember Sony. Any product, if it is Sony, you just buy it blindfolded. Even Maruti cars, people were buying Maruti cars. If I see, if I go to German manufacturer, for example, Volkswagen, it has very good brand value, and people buy these products just based on quality of the product. But today, if you see the customers, they are not just looking at the product; they are looking at the company. How the company is performing. So it's not just quality of the product, but also how is the company. I mean, what are they doing? For example, responsibility towards environment, towards social domain, and how they sort of put it across, how they govern the things. The entire sustainability focus is coming, and a lot of, for example, today's generation, Gen Z or millennials, they make their purchasing decisions based on the performance of the company, rather than just the product. Sustainability today, of course, the performance in sustainability, it does define a lot of purchasing decisions. We have had instances where, for example, OEMs, they have conducted some sort of a due diligence and ESG score. It was 78% against 80% requirement, but the RFQ was held. And unless that supplier again worked on it and improved, then only the RFQ was released. There have been a lot of such cases that the businesses are being put on hold if you are not performing in this field properly. Regulatory frameworks, for example, BRSR has come in India now. So currently, we are only talking about the top 1,000 companies, but if you consider the automotive field, most of the OEMs fall within that top 1,000 category. And next year, almost 27, 28, in their own BRSR report, they also have to report the supplier data as a mandatory. So whether you are mandatorily covered under BRSR or not, if your customer is covered, automatically you get covered under a lot of. So you have to report a lot of it, your customer will be asking. BRSR is for India. And if you are supplying, for example, to European Union, so they are talking about CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. Again, you have to meet all those regulations. 1st January 26, EU has already introduced their own CBAM. In 27, UK will introduce. So even if you want to sort of export components globally, you still have to meet all these requirements. So competitiveness today is not just cost and quality. It is also how you perform in sustainability, what are you doing under decarbonization, how you are performing in the social domain, all the things. It's sort of a complete package of all these things. Now, today, if you see India's component industry, we have just sort of started beginning to align with these regulations, whether global or domestic. Most of the things are happening. It's very sort of, when I see the industry, it's a nascent stage. Okay, there will be many big players who will be already doing some of the things, but if you see Indian auto component industry, 70 to 80% of them are MSMEs. And MSMEs, very, very little work as far as sustainability is concerned. Yeah, some of them have started taking what you call your baby steps. Some initial energy efficiency program, some, let's say, some solar panels in renewable energy adoption, maybe some pilot small projects for footprint reductions. Those kind of things are happening, but still just random, it's not very structured. Then, of course, there are now, for example, time-bound, target-oriented, structured project-based methodologies in our industry. It's still more of a compliance. Most of the things are happening because of significant external pressures which are coming from customers, customer audits. Customer wants a certain thing, so you have to comply. Then maybe a regulator is wanting something, then you have to comply. But voluntary participation is still very, very low. You see ISO certification, for example, 14,001, 45,000, ACMA safety. They are quite well widespread. But when you talk about, for example, 50,001, and that's still picking up. 37,001, I don't think people ever know about 37,001 anti-bribery in the social domain. These kind of standards are still very, very new. Nobody is really working on acquiring these standards. Now, size of the company is also one of the major factors in this. Large companies, they are well equipped, they can do all the things. Smaller companies like MSMEs, they are not able to perform as well because there are those resource gaps, there are those skill gaps between the larger and smaller companies. Apart from that, you have multiple customers. One customer will ask your data in one format, another customer will get another standard, a third customer will ask again the third standard. So there are multiple ESG standards today, sustainability standards. There is no unified one standard that everybody can follow. I heard some time back that they're working on unification of these standards. I don't know when that's going to happen, but at this point of time, it's causing a lot of confusion. So people are really very confused which one to follow, which one not to follow. But when you consider an MSME field, the top challenges that we see today, why the sustainability field is not very popular with them. First of all, technical know-how really available, not available to them. Now, if you want to invest something in any of the projects, that kind of capital is not available to the MSME industry. Most of these companies, even when they have grown big, they are still being run as government op stores.
राजू मेरे को ये लगा देगा कहीं से
very little
कहाँ से
internal
लगेगा
willingness to change. Could you mute, please? So we find that very little internal willingness to change. We have to do a lot of work convincing them. So this is good for you. Customers, the way earlier, for example, Maruti worked with their own tier 1 suppliers and brought them up to a certain level. We don't find the tier 1s working with the tier group. Specifically in the sustainability domain, there is a very, very less customer support in terms of educating and training tier 2, tier 3 suppliers. Then data capture is very limited. Most of it happening manually, so it's a lot of work. Unless you go to a digital platform or something. As of today, we find that the data capture is very, very minimal, and we really have to work a lot getting the right kind of data. Again, the reporting has also started now because customer wants you to report. Customer is asking. Many OEMs, they have rotated their own specific formats in which they are wanting those data from the suppliers. On the BRSR, most of the companies are covered under BRSR. So BRSR core those line attributes. Against that, the data is being asked by all the customers. Again, reporting is now becoming more and more. Customers are asking, so supplier have to report. You don't have an option. But then again, when you report, there is an element of what you call transparency. Okay? Now, transparency today is just not about compliance. Transparency is more about credibility. And we say that the suppliers which can perform credibly, which have verifiable performance, they are the ones who are being preferred for additional businesses. digitalization is one of the things which we find that this is a great enabler and it will help a lot in this initiative. And simple, digital tools or simple standardized reporting formats. There are a lot of OEMs today, they are asking for supplier scorecards. For example, I know about TVS Motors, they're doing something called My Sustainability Index. There's a specific scorecard against which you have to perform. So these kind of things are becoming very, very normal today. You, as a component manufacturer, you have to comply with all these things. So what we see is that, okay, we do see that digitalization is really going to help in this. So if you have a simple dashboards, it gives you scope-wise emissions or your major performance against major KPIs of SMG, that becomes easy for you to see at a glance. And you could have monthly reporting templates, standardized templates, which are aligned with your customer requirements. And then you can have some digital platforms that will help you to automate the data collection. That will take a lot of load of the manual part. We have started and we are doing good. And I hope that we will be, of course, again, at par with global companies. Yeah.
So true, sir. Yeah, so true. I think thanks a lot. I think it kind of sets up the tone for the rest of the table also, right? And I think what you ended with kind of gives a good segue into what I want to ask Tarun. Tarun, I think a large part of the conversation with you, I also wanted to understand, right? The importance of carbon measurement in effective decarbonization as such, because I think what you can't track, you can't measure, or what you can't measure, you can't track. And without tracking, you don't know whether you're moving from 1 to 0 or not, right? And couple that with your, across different scope 1, 2, 3, whether which is within your boundary or whether it is not within the boundary. But there requires a practical way to do this, because while a large part of this is the science part of it, there are suppliers, there are humans, there are different operational bottlenecks that are involved, right? So that is another aspect. If you can touch, after giving your introduction as well from your own words, that would be great. And finally, thought if you can, just touch on, moving, like a large part of this, as I told you, they look at it as a tick in the box. But how can, companies look at it in terms of, taking operational decisions based on, the emissions report that is getting generated, because a large part of this, the industry requires it. Not a lot of people are doing it. So if you can just, throw in your 2 cents on that, we'd love to hear it from you.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Siddharth, first of all, for this opportunity to speak to all of you. Thank you, Sharma sir, for giving us such a great insight on what the current state of the system is. I'm Tarun Jha. I'm the founder of Helionis Labs. What we do is we design thermal management solutions for high power electronics. So I'll come at this discussion as a more like a material scientist or a process engineer, because sir has already given you the lay of the land. So yeah, uh, to give you an example, why measurement is important and why all this needs to be done. What I'll do is I'll just comment it from the point of view of an MSN. Like sir already mentioned, that these things are already being taken care of when it comes to multinational or large scale organizations. But when it comes to small MSMEs, it's still difficult to keep a track of all the emissions and then use that measurement to actually do something. It's next step, right? So, is it okay if I share an image with you?
Yeah, you should be able to, right?
Yeah. I think I should be able to.
Yes.
So, okay. So,
Yeah.
can you see this image of an LED light? Okay.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah. Okay. So again, thank you everyone for being here in this session. So I'll try to answer all the questions that Siddharth had from the point of view of an MSME company owner myself, and how we look at it. And what I'll do is I'll just take this small example of a product which will help you in thinking how you can apply this to your own particular company. because for automotive supply chain is too big. There are like thousands of components. Obviously, we don't want this to be a generic discussion. So I'll just take this example and try to cover all the questions that Siddharth had. Is that good, Siddharth? Is that okay?
Yes, sir. The stage is all yours.
Sure. Okay. So, yeah, everyone, what you see here in front of you is an LED light. Okay. This is generally a street LED light. However, similar structure is also used in an automotive lighting. Okay. So, what you can see on top, the yellow part are the LED chips. They are mounted on this white sort of board that is an MCPCB board, and that the thing with fins in it is a heat sink. Okay, so I'll not go into too much detail, but this is basically an LED light. It contains three basic components, although it has many more components. But let's say it has chips, it has MCPCB, and it has heat sink. Now, suppose you are a company that is making this kind of an LED light. How do you think of decarbonization at your end? Okay, so I think all of you already know that there are scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions. Scope 1 is basically the emission that you generate at your end in your factory or in your production environment. So if you are burning diesel to say heat your furnace or to run any kind of equipment, the the emissions that come from that is a scope 1 emission. Scope 2 is basically the power that you use. Okay, so for example, if you are using electricity from a grid to run your day-to-day operations, those emissions come under scope 2. And then scope 3 covers the rest of it, all the upstream as well as downstream. So for example, the chips, the aluminum board, the casting, all the suppliers that you got that from, the carbon emissions from for generating those components, as well as the carbon emission that is generated in the process of using this product. So, for example, this LED light goes on street, and when it operates, say for the next 10 to 12 years for 40,000 to 50,000 hours, all the emissions that are produced as a result of that, those are scope 3 emissions. These are all the three emissions that we generally keep a track of. Is that clear, Siddharth? Am I making sense? Should I carry on?
Please go on. Yeah, please carry on.
Okay. Okay, so I'll for now I'll just remove. Okay, I'll keep the image if that is okay. Yeah. So now, as Siddharth mentioned, the first question was why is measuring so important? So as you said so nicely that what gets measured gets managed, right? So like that is a very common saying in a management environment. However, that is very relevant to manufacturing environment too. So whatever parameter you are measuring or keeping a track of, you can only manage that parameter, and that is why measurement is very important. Now, another thing is that let's take the example of this component. As I mentioned that I'll be going through the answers, taking the example of this LED light. Now, say I'm in an MSME manufacturer who's making an automotive light for say the likes of Maruti or Honda or anyone. Now, if I have to keep a track of my carbon emissions, I should be able to know all the scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions that I mentioned earlier, right? However, if I'm not measuring them correctly, how will I be able to know what are those values, right? Now, intuitively, what I'll see is that, okay, let's take this example again. I'm using an aluminum heat sink, I'm using an MCPCB, and I'm using the yellow chip, that is LED chips. So LED chips is generally supplied by someone outside. uh, Heat sink and LCPCB board is something that we make in house. So if we don't measure and if we go at it intuitively, our intuition will say that okay, most of the carbon emission would come from the process that is involved in making of that this thing, aluminum heat sink as well as the MCPCB. However, if you actually measure all the emissions, if you actually keep a track of all these emissions, you'll realize that the major chunk, in this case, 80 to 85% of the overall emissions will come from the scope 3. So the one that I mentioned are scope 1 and scope 2. However, the one that it doesn't come intuitively to us is the scope 3. By scope 3, what I mean is that this LED light is going to be running for 30,000 to 40,000 hours, right? Over the period of this 30,000 to 40,000 hours, the power that will get wasted, or whatever the power that is used, the carbon emission for that is going to cover 80 to 85% of the calculation. And that is something that you don't understand intuitively. And that is again the reason why measurement is so important. Because if we go by intuition, we don't really get the right answers. Another thing is that obviously it's very difficult to keep a track of everything. Like we don't know how much emission is used in the making of heat sink. We don't know how much emission is used in the making of the MCPCB board or the chip. So if we don't actually have some way to keep a track or record these things, it becomes a very wishy-washy thing. You don't really have any exact data points. You're just doing some assumptions. So that is why measurement is very important, because if you can't measure, you can't actually manage this. Does that answer the first part, Siddharth? Why measurement is so
Perfect.
important?
Perfect,
Perfect.
Tarun.
Okay.
Please go on.
Now, see, once we have made the measurement, uh, the second part is what is the approach that we can take to actually put it on paper, right? Actually put it in practice, right? Generally, what happens in the industry is that measurements are done as a part of an year-end audit or something. Uh, Basically, all the emissions are measured at the end of the year. Then they are put in a report which goes to the senior members of the company. And rarely are those reports actually worked on, right? So, what we actually need to do is we need to reverse the process. We need to analyze what all are the various steps, the components that are there. Then we need to put our measurement devices, if we have, or something to keep a track of what every step, every component uses, and then modify the material sourcing or the process parameters or anything that we can on our end to make sure that we can somehow work on this decarbonization, right? Generally, as I mentioned, the approach is opposite. We do all the process, and at the end, we just analyze the report. But unless and until we use that report in such a way that it guards our decisions, it's not going to make any kind of impact. So, the suggestion to any MSME or if any large scale company is to actually start in the reverse order, start tracking your parameters first, and then design the process, the product design, the procurement system, the supply chain, all should be designed after considering the measurements. Okay, I think that answers the second question. The third question
Yes,
would
Siddharth.
be, and this, I'll keep this very short. I'll give you a few examples of how we can use this approach in our product. Okay, being an engineer, I'll give you an example of how simple process changes or simple design changes can help us in significantly reducing our carbon content and thus help in decarbonization. Right. So, okay. So once again, I'll go back to the same example, the LED fixture that you have. Now, one of the major component that you have in that is an MCPCB. Now, what an MCPCB does is basically it provides current to the LED chips and it generates light, and it also conducts heat. Now, when I'm coming at it from thinking of it as like I somehow need to lower the carbon emissions, one of the things that again that doesn't come intuitively to me, but it is very essential, is that if I can somehow improve the thermal performance of this LED light. So for example, if I can have a better MCPCB which somehow improves the thermal performance of the LED light by say 10%, then over the period of this 30,000 to 40,000 hours of its operation, that will yield great results in terms of decarbonizing. So my first approach would be, somehow can I get a better material for this MCPCB, improves its thermal performance. Now that does is, say if I get a better performance material, that improves the performance of LED. Second, that improves the lifetime also. So the same thing that was going to last for say 20,000 hours, it will last you for 40,000 hours. That again is a great step for decarbonizing. Third step is if you get a better board, it also reduces the size of the heat sink. So you end up using less aluminum. And as you can see in the figure itself, aluminum is a major chunk of like the carbon source, because aluminum I think uses 15 to 20 tons per this thing ton of aluminum, like CO2 per ton of aluminum. So if you can somehow reduce that also gives you a good decarbonizing strategy, right? So these three steps, this is just from this product's point of view, but this gives you an idea that if you are a product designer or a component designer for a larger scale OEM, this is how you can think. First, you have to think on design. So if you can somehow modify the design, then you have to think on the component sourcing. So if you are sourcing aluminum, you can source better like recycled aluminum, say, right? Because it has the same properties and much lower carbon footprint, right? So steps like these can help you in making much better decisions from the carbon footprint point of view. Yeah, I think pretty much this would be all that I had to say for your questions. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Tarun. Probably if you can also, yeah. Thought
Yeah.
thanks a lot. I think there are two or three very interesting points that you kind of pointed out, right? One is how can you change the material or the design of how the supply chains are set up so that you can be less intensive. Second aspect of it is can you innovate on the material science itself so that it kind of reduces the overall emissions profile, right? I think we'll move on to a section which is much more discussion oriented with Sharma sir and Tarun going forward, right? Sharma sir, just wanted to pick your brains. Uh, 4 decades of experience in this sector. A large part of this sector has legacy supply chains already built. So, Tarun raised an interesting point that the supply chains need to be built or designed that way, or innovation has to happen. From an OEM or a big manufacturer's perspective, right? Building a resilient supply chain, which is already existing, changing it, moving it towards decarbonizing is not an easy task, right? So if you can just throw some light on, I think these are the areas where decarbonization really loses its momentum, right? From stakeholders, whether it's cost effective or not. There are legacies, supply chains built. How do you change it or how do you modify it in a step-by-step manner? Right? If you can just start shedding your light as well from that perspective.
Yeah, yeah, of course. What you said is legacy manufacturing, that is totally very deep embedded in our minds. It is very difficult to pull people out of that kind of thing. But when you ask for, let's say, a resilient supply chain, so what would be a resilient supply chain for an OEM customer? Maybe I want suppliers which will perform despite disruptions. Okay? The disruptions will keep happening. But if my suppliers can perform and meet my schedules and give me what I want, despite this disruption, that I would call you're very resilient. So low carbon, of course. I mean, easiest method is to start making components for EVs here. So everything becomes low carbon. Your entire scope 3 emissions become zero. Okay? But then, of course, there are a lot of capital invested in already existing facilities. So we need to see how those facilities maybe can be modified or what can we do about it so that you become low carbon and still you're able to perform. First thing for building resilience is that somebody needs to teach them what is the risk assessment thing. You need to project what can happen maybe after 3 months or after 6 months, 1 year or 2 years. I remember we used to make a lot of contingency plans earlier. As per ISO, according to the ISO standards, you had to have a contingency plan. But the contingency at that point of time were different. Today the contingencies have become different. So today, when I do my risk assessment, I have to see how climate change is going to affect my supply chain. So we have seen earlier there have been instances where the entire automotive supply chain has come to a standstill because of the Japan tsunami. So Chennai, cyclone, the entire supply chain in Chennai. 2 दिन के लिए मारुति का supply बंद हो गया. So those kind of things keep happening. I mean, we have to sort of, first of all, this has to be continuous type of exercise. You have to see what can happen and then you build a contingency for that. Other than that, in your current operations, for example, energy. Now, energy in India is coal heavy still. If you use the traditional grid energy, you will have more emissions. So it becomes pertinent that you keep on, enhancing your share of renewable power. It gives me a great pleasure to see that, especially in states like Tamil Nadu, there are auto component manufacturers who are already performing at 100% renewable. But of course, we have some, state level caps on how much you can build. So the states have put a caps of 50%, 75%. But of course, according to those, at least we can work on enhancing our share of the renewable energy. So that will reduce a lot of your scope 2 emissions. And when you talk about materials, today, most of the materials that we use, these are virgin. Like Tarun just spoke about aluminum. No, aluminum, we are using a virgin Lola. Can I use a recycled aluminum? Can I increase the percentage of that recycle? Today, I think it's already happening in the industry, but it's not still widespread. So I can use green steel. So already, I think Tata has put up a plant which is already making green steel. Okay, so those kind of aluminum, plastics, recycling. Some of the recycled content is already being mixed in the plastics, but we need to see more of the recycled content in materials. So as we increase the recycled content in the material, as we move on to green material, plant-based oils or things like that, that is again going to reduce our emissions in the scope 3 level. So material में scope 3 का emission में रखा गया. Again, there is some sort of a what you call OEM mindset is there, but I think we are now coming out of it. I think Tata Motors has already allowed its suppliers to use recycled materials. Okay. Then of course there is this waste. So a lot of waste happening in the companies. So what we do is, when we are working with you, we are setting targets for 100% circularity. Materials. For example, if you are working in an aluminum die casting company, of course, everything goes to recycle, everything goes back to the furnace. So everything is recyclable. But there are other materials where you need to have more of recycling. There could be, cases where you will be able to do the recycling within the company. And there may be cases where you will have to work with the recycler and then achieve your targets of 100% circularity. Even the other waste, apart from material, that also has to be reused and recycled. So a lot of recycling has to happen in the waste. I think this is one area which is a lot of sort of neglected. I mean, there is a question of who is going to put the bill for recycling, but we have to actually, make a cost benefit analysis and see that this is very, very actually beneficial for us. Apart from that, the entire supply chain, as I said, tier 2, tier 3, you have to work with the entire supply chain. Otherwise, how much emissions you can reduce? 70% or more emissions are coming from your supply chains. So you have to work in a sort of collaborative manner with your suppliers. You give them a training support, you give them other support that what they need, and so that your supply chain emissions reduce. And finally, reporting. You have to become transparent. You have to give a full disclosure of all your scope 3 emissions. Maybe you have to go for digital mapping or something like that. These kind of things will start happening, then we'll say that we have become resilient. Right?
Yeah. Sir, I'll definitely come. I think there's one point which I'll want to touch back with you before the closing remarks from your end, right? Tarun, thought I'll just move towards you. One interesting question, I think you are somebody who's innovating on materials because you're trying to, one part of what you discuss is called use phase emissions, right? During the usage of the product, if you can improve thermal efficiency, thereby reducing the emissions. So that is what you are alluding to. A large part of the decisions right now is when you manufacture these new products, which are much more, less carbon intensive, if I may call it. The cost parity of an incumbent solution versus yours is something that needs to be taken care of, right? Because at the end of the day, only if you are giving it at a competitive price, will there be adoption, right? So a large part of the sustainability goals, especially on materials, are going in and innovating is contingent on the cost parity or the total cost of operations, or however you want to look at it. And also from a perspective of for decarbonization to take, for it to move forward without losing momentum, a large part of these decisions are taken by the procurement teams within each of these players, right? So how do you kind of navigate that particular aspect of it, right? Balancing your cost, quality, and also ensuring it's much more, foolproof or less carbon intensive. Tarun, you're on mute.
So that's a great question, Siddharth. What I would suggest is that, see, uh, till now, the overall approach has been that decarbonization is a good to have thing and not a must have thing. So even though we are moving much ahead towards the must have things, like especially in the European Union and all, they have new regulations where they mandate like carbonize like the data even from the component supplier. So, however, I think the only thing that can move the wheel forward in this direction would be to make solutions somehow which are at cost parity to them. See, carbon has a value attached to it. So, for every ton of carbon dioxide emission, there is a cost attached to it. And we will have to attach a cost to it because, in the end, what I have realized is that Indian market or even the overseas market, when it comes to procuring a product or a component, price and quality are the two main like the deciding factors, right? So if you can't compete on price and you can't compete on quality, then uh, like being carbon friendly or having lower carbon footprint, it just becomes a good to have, right? So I think this has to come more from the point of view. So you have to look at it from two point of view. One has to come from the regulators, that they have to put a price on uh, carbon dioxide emissions, which is being done, right? And the second is comes to the innovators. So companies like us, we have to somehow work on it in such a way that we can keep the product cost competitive. So, for example, uh, the example again that I mentioned, the better quality PCB, if we use it, might be expensive. But if it leads to like a reduction in total cost of ownership or improved lifetime or less usage of aluminum, we somehow are able to maintain that cost, right? If it is say plus minus 5%, plus minus 4%, uh, uh, an OEM wouldn't mind it too much. But if it is beyond that, then it becomes a matter of cost. So yeah, in short, it has to come from regulation and it has to come through innovation.
Got it. Great, Tarun. So I think we are ending the fag end of the session, right? I thought I'll ask one question each to you and VK sir. I'll, go back to VK sir because you just connected. Uh, More like a quick, fast turnaround answer, which we usually do across all the carbon teams that we do. Right. Sir, two or three things which the industry must do for decarbonization to really take place in the next year and a half. Right. Very quick answer from your end on the top of your head. What do you think they are, sir?
We talk about resource efficiency and circular economy. These are the two things which are key pillars for improving your efficiency. So you have to what LPG is also all about responsible consumption and responsible production. First is I think you need to reduce the consumption of your resources. And then whatever waste is happening, there is no sort of negotiation. You have to go for 100% circularity. Another thing is that I think in the field of sustainability, a lot of initiatives don't happen because just we do not really have those kind of green skills available. Upskilling is a major concern in the industry, auto component industry specifically. We don't have so many sustainability professionals. Customers are not really making too many efforts to educate the suppliers. So there, I think, and there has to be some kind of what you call a governance structure. So I don't see sustainability officers in companies. I see EHS head being given an additional responsibility of sustainability. And there is still a misconception that this is just another arm of that EMS system. So we have to have sustainability officers, sustainability councils. Another thing is that we should be investing something on automation. So more and more automation, simple. You can have IoT sensors or something that will give you the machine health or something on a regular basis. Simple robotics, let's say just pick and place type of arrangements, which will help you to reduce your overall energy consumptions. Then technologies, for example, near net chip manufacturing. Okay? So the casting will come out, so that it will require minimum machining. And then of course there are new technologies of 3D printing and all. Again, you have to work with those things. Supplier system has to be a collaborative thing where maybe the waste from one can become a raw material for the other one. That could be one. There could be groups or clusters of suppliers which could be given these trainings, and apart from that, they can sort of pool. For example, I want renewable energy, but I have to put up a minimum 1 megawatt plant. I require only 100 kilowatts, so maybe 8 or 10 of these companies can come together and then put up a plant and then share the benefits on alternative materials, alternative technologies. We have to collaborate with experts. For example, Fraunhofer in Germany. Again, you have to come together to pool resources, and there are options and solutions available. And apart from that, of course, you have to build some sort of ecosystem so that even if there is some kind of a disruption in another part of the world, you should be able to still perform at whatever level you want.
Great, VK sir. Tarun, I think it's a rapid fire. We are ending the last 2 minutes, so probably this thing, 1 to 2 things which the industry must do for decarbonization to take place over the next year and a half.
Sure. I think Sharma sir has already pretty much covered all the important points. Just two more important points, and I will go through them very quickly. Again, I'll reiterate that regulations should be stringent. So we have to somehow incentivize the people who are actually doing this. So that will give us more incentives to be more conscious about the carbon strategy. Second thing would be to have this again comes from something that Sir said that. For a small scale player, 6 customers have 6 different types of forms that need to be filled in the format that data needs to be sent out. What we can have is some sort of a standard format a template which we follow throughout the industry. This would and make it easier for small players out there to supply their data. Ask for minimal data that is required so that small players like us or others out there find it easy to report this. And obviously, like better technology for monitoring various factors. Yeah.
Great, Tarun. I mean, great. I think we've kind of reached the 5 p.m. mark. Thought we will have some questions from the attendees, but unfortunately, we are very, very, very close to it. So please do write up if you have any questions to us or the marketing team at Fitsol, and we will see if we can, get back to you guys via mail for questions from the panelists. Really sorry. We did have something planned, but then the problem was, I think the session was too good that I just wanted it to keep going, and I kind of didn't keep bear of the time, right? So thanks a lot for joining, folks. Thought Aditi, if you want to, give a closing remarks and the next things, I am cool from my end.
Thanks, Siddharth. And I would like to also thank VK Sharma sir and Tarun for this insightful session. Like Siddharth mentioned, you can share your questions if you have any on email, and we will try to answer that. Before we wrap up, just a couple of things that we have shared our decarbonization playbook in the chat box. You can access it there, or we'll be sharing it via email also to all the attendees. Secondly, we'll be sharing the YouTube link once the webinar is out on our YouTube channel. You can access it there, or we can send it to you via mail also. With that, I would like to thank Mr. VK Sharma and Mr. Tarun Jha for taking out time for this session, and well, Siddharth also. And thank you to everyone for joining today's session, the Carbon Table. We look forward to having you for our next session. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Have a great weekend.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day. Bye.